last man can no longer keep our city hostage.
I promised to keep our streets safe, and I delivered.
Welcome back to another Daredevil breakdown with a really surprising episode with the way it ended, especially with Muse, because I totally thought the character would last in the show a lot longer than he did. However, in this week's breakdown, we're going to be breaking down everything from episode 7, from the start to the finish, some of those little Easter eggs that were within it, and also just breaking down what the ending set up for the rest of the show. So with that, let's jump into the first part of the episode where we see that Fisk is now finding out that Daredevil is back, which means that hell's going to be paid, especially after the first episode where Fisk turned around and told Matt that if he put on the Daredevil mask again, there would be consequences. So this is just all leading up to the confrontation of Fisk and his Anti-Vigilante task force going after Daredevil and trying to put a stop to him. So that's just all setting up what's going to happen for the last few episodes of the season, especially because now we're kind of done with Muse. We're going on to the next thing, which is the Anti-Vigilante task force, Mayor Fisk going after vigilantes, and just setting up what's to come for the next season, because there are only 2 episodes left. Now, in the next scene is where we get the first Easter egg of the episode, where when we're going to cut to the hospital scene with Angela, we get to see an ad for Winston Supreme Canadian Whiskey. Now, this isn't an actual whiskey, it's a play on Weiser's Canadian Whiskey. Now, this is actually a whiskey from the comic that notably appeared in the Demon in a Bottle storyline for Iron Man from 1978, where Tony Stark was dealing with being an alcoholic. Now, funny enough, I actually own this comic, where it's kind of one of those weird stories where I got this as a present as a kid, and I never actually got to read it until I got a little older, because of the fact of them dealing with alcoholism and being an alcoholic. It just wasn't appropriate for the age I was when I got this. And honestly, I don't even remember how old I was when I got this comic, but I own it. And it's kind of a cool little reference that I'm pretty sure I would have never noticed if I didn't own this comic. But that's not the only appearance of this alcohol, because we've also seen it in the Jessica Jones series, as she used to drink it straight out of a Mickey. So it was cool to kind of get these little Easter eggs. Like, this is just something that's kind of out of the blue, something you wouldn't expect, but it's a nice little nod to the comics and the other shows. But that's when we get to Angela in the hospital, now dealing with the trauma that she just went through with having a majority of her blood being sucked out of her by Muse, which is just such a traumatic experience, which I also feel is going to be this catalyst for her to become a vigilante, pick up where her uncle left off, because she sees how there's this darkness in New York City and how it needs more help that the cops aren't dealing with. So it's definitely setting up her just going down this darker path of being this vigilante, and I'm curious to see what they're going to do. I still have a feeling like they're not going to fully go into her being White Tiger just yet, especially with how, like, where she was White Tiger, then became a villain, and ended up not being a very good character after her death. So I'm very curious to see what they're going to do with her. I know a lot of people are speculating she might actually become part of the Young Avengers / Champions because of the fact that she's a young character. She's a relative to White Tiger, and it would make sense that that's where they would be going. So it's just interesting to speculate what they're going to be doing with that part of the story. And then when we continue with Matt again, he's back home and he's getting his freak on with Heather. And the thing that's going on here, she notices that he's pretty banged up, and he tries to blow it off as, you know, he was just kind of walking, he bumped into things, but she can kind of see through his lies. She knows Matt wasn't just going on a walk. He was up doing something. He wasn't actually going to work, and just showing that there's some inconsistencies with Matt's life that she's not been fully aware of, and it shows that Matt is hiding something from her, which is probably going to deal with problems going in the relationship later down the road, especially when she does find out that he is Daredevil. You know, she's going to get mad that he's been lying to her, and there's just going to be consequences for that, because in the comics, Heather does die. Not by a villain, but just by her unaliving herself. However, in this, I definitely thought that Muse was going to be the one to take her out. However, that didn't happen, and it feels like instead of being this traumatic experience for Matt down the road of losing another person he cared about, she's just going to leave him for not being open with her. So I'm very curious to see how they deal with that storyline, especially where right now his life, he talks about how it feels is fake, and not the part of him being with Heather, but everything else, because he's in this nice apartment, he's in this fancy law firm. Like, there's stuff here that he's dealing with that his normal past life wouldn't be like that. He helped the regular folk. Their office wasn't anything fancy, and he was just dealing with his friends, and now he's not with them. He has new friends, and it's just showing that he's avoiding some of his past trauma. He's been avoiding it. He didn't put on the Daredevil mask because he was avoiding everything that kind of came with it, with Foggy's death, and now with everything that's going on, it's all starting to come back out. He's starting to go back to his old ways, and the life he had been avoiding is all slowly coming back, which just means that this current fake life he has is not going to last for long, and it's going to go back to the ways it used to be, but probably a little bit darker because of all that inner rage that has just built up over the years, and we definitely saw that during the fight with Muse. And then we had Cherry going up and getting mad at Matt for the fact that he told him not to go be Daredevil and go and attack Muse and let the cops deal with it. But this is the irony here, is like, why would you tell Matt anything about Muse in the first place if you didn't want him to go be Daredevil and take down Muse? Because Matt pulled at a good point that if he didn't, the cops wouldn't have done anything, and Angela would have died. And the thing is here is just like, I can't believe Cherry was just saying that Matt should have left it alone. He shouldn't have been Daredevil. Well, you shouldn't have told him about Muse and what was going on, because then Matt probably wouldn't have been Daredevil. Now, to be fair, he probably would have went out to be Daredevil anyways, finding out that Angela was missing, but I feel like Cherry telling him was just the catalyst about setting him up for being Daredevil once again and going after Muse. It all just led into Cherry putting this target on Muse in front of Matt and being like, hey, I know you used to be a vigilante, but don't go after this criminal that needs to be taken down by a vigilante. It's just like the irony here. And we get to the part where Matt wants Cherry to look into his contacts, find more information about Muse's victims, and Matt even calls out Cherry, being like, hey, you called me when you needed help when I was Daredevil. So showing that they kind of had a cop vigilante relationship where he would call him for help, which is just kind of like that reference to superheroes working with cops, because they do in multiple media. Like most notably, we know Jim Gordon works with Batman, so we have those relationships throughout comics, and it really makes sense that that's where they were at one point. And we even have the moment where Kirsten is mad that she's not being included in these secret conversations, and I feel like that's just going to lead her to figure out why they were having these secret conversations. It's going to lead into her finding out that Matt is Daredevil, because in the comics, she's actually was able to figure it out pretty early on. It definitely feels like as the story progresses, maybe not this season, but maybe next season, she's going to put 2 and 2 together, and there's going to have this revelation that her partner, her friend, is a vigilante, and I feel like they're going to deal with it in some dramatic way. But as we move forward, we find out that Fisk is talking about how Daredevil used to go around and beat up all his men that used to work to make the city a better place, especially without due process, even saying that these people were doing good for the city, which is all tying back to the first season of Daredevil, where they were taking down Kingpin, and Daredevil in the final episode was going around taking down Kingpin's men and taking him down as well. So just reference to what Daredevil has done to the Kingpin in the past and pulling up their past history. And we even have Buck talking about how Fisk is now mayor. He can go around things in other ways. You know, if he targets Daredevil right away, it could look as a sign of revenge and going after him, using that use of power to go after his old enemy. But if he plays it smart, he could be dealing with the vigilantes, especially Daredevil, in a more strategic way that allows him to take him down without making it look like he's specifically targeting Daredevil. And Fisk's storyline in this episode was interesting because it pretty much focused on him doing his anti-vigilante stuff, but also dealing with the mobs. Because we also had Vanessa, who went and had a secret meeting with Luca, and he seemed very suspicious, where Luca's mad about how they aren't earning as much. He liked it better when Vanessa was in charge, and he wants her to be in charge once again, and he wants to make a change, which pretty much means he wants to take out Fisk. However, when we go further into the episode, by the end, we do have Vanessa turning around, sending a text to Luca, and then Luca going out to try to murder Fisk, which at first I was like, holy crap, Vanessa has now betrayed her husband, because she also wants that power again. However, it more looks like Vanessa had told Fisk what went down. They set up a trap. Luca came in, Buck took him out, and now they're going to be slowly taking down the mobs one by one as they try to take down Fisk, and Fisk now rules over all of them, and he threatens them. It's most likely what's going to happen here. Fisk is going to call them out for Luca trying to take him out. He's going to take back control, and he's going to tell them if they don't want to follow his rules, they're going to end up in the ground just like Luca. So very curious to see how they're going to deal with this overarching plot, because it is definitely setting up Mayor Fisk going back to his Kingpin ways, but also still being Mayor Fisk at the same time. Like Buck is going to be the one doing his dirty work, and it's just tying into all of the people who are going to get their hands dirty without Fisk physically getting his hands dirty. So I'm very curious to see how they're going to deal with this, and how the plot's going to unfold as they dive deeper into the Mayor Fisk storyline. Then we catch up with Detective Kim, who went to Muse's lair, and we just get to see the horrific stuff that's going on in that lair. We see all the different murals, we see the bodies hanging, and just showing how disturbed Muse really was. This is also the moment where it's kind of cutting in between with Angela telling Matt about Muse's obsession with faces, as Detective Kim is looking at these paintings with faces, all of them, all giving them the ideas that Muse is obsessed with people, and that they need to look at these paintings to figure out who the victims could be, who he might be targeting next, and just setting up the plot that was coming down to the confrontation with Muse later in the episode. Which then we end up finding out that Muse's name is Bastion, which in the comics, he didn't actually have a name. They just kind of always referred to him as Muse, and I don't think they ever revealed who he really was. And one of the things I was kind of disappointed with all of this is that we never saw Muse with his powers. Just another kind of character in the comics that they took away their powers and just made him another basic human. Which I get it, why they probably didn't give him powers is because in the comics, he was an Inhuman, and we're not really dealing with Inhumans anymore. And we're more going towards the mutants and the X-Men. But honestly, I fully expected them to just make him a mutant at that point. But I guess we'll see if, maybe he miraculously comes back after this episode, that he maybe does have powers. This is all speculation. We'll see what happens in the next couple episodes. However, this is when we start getting to the point where it's intercutting between Bastion going to see Heather and Detective Kim talking to Mayor Fisk about what the suspect is and who Bastion is. How this was a kid with past issues. He was part of Taekwondo. he hated it. He even hated it so much that the best trainer that his parents could afford came and trained him. He killed him. The trainer was found dead on his estate, just showing that violent tendencies from a young age, but also showing that Bastion was telling Heather that he felt invisible, that his parents never listened to him, showing that this kid, all he ever wanted to be was seen, and he never felt like he was seen until he started doing his art, showing that when he went to go see Heather and learned about and read her book, he started to feel like he knew how to be seen once again. He knew how to make people know who he really was, and by becoming Muse and doing his murals, people were actually seeing him for who he was, rather than ignoring his wants and his interests, and his parents making him do what they wanted him to do. So just showing that his past trauma and his violent tendencies came from this want to be seen. And we even see that during some of the art that Daredevil's flipping through. Some of the art does show how he's visible. He's now being seen. And it's very interesting to show those perspectives about this serial killer. And during all of this as well, Heather's starting to piece together that the person she's talking to is this serial killer Muse, which then ends up having her try to run to the door and Muse knocking her out, setting up her as being his next victim. Which I definitely called this from like the beginning of the season. When we did see Bastion go to see Heather in her book signing, like I figured that was going to be who he was. He said he needed help. He seemed like a little bit troubled, and it definitely felt like they were setting up Muse right there and then, so we already saw who he was before we even got to this episode. But then when we go to Fisk and the Vigilante Task Force, we see that they're investigating Muse's lair, and as we're walking around, we see another triggered mural, which we do see again later after Daredevil is flipping through the art. We see triggered again, just showing that Punisher logo we saw a couple episodes ago, so that's just a really cool reference to what we already saw. But when Daredevil does swoop in, that was just kind of like a really cool moment of him coming to check out the lair once again to find out who Muse's next target was. Don't really know why he didn't do more investigating of that after he brought Angela to the hospital. However, he's back there, and I do love that during all of this, we get to see another Punisher mural, but this time it's Punisher with his gun up in the air, which is a reference to the comics, the Punisher logo I've used in a couple videos now, with Muse painting the mural on the wall and Kingpin going to look at it. So just really cool to get that little reference to the comics, as well as just seeing the other disturbed art that Muse has been making. Plus, Matt is filling all these paintings to figure out who the next person is because Muse is obsessed with faces, so he's somehow able to feel the faces on the pieces of paper. But my biggest question here is, by touching all this paper, wouldn't this leave fingerprints all over it? Like, if the cops decide to kind of figure out who this was, they'd see all these different fingerprints that aren't Bastion's on it and kind of pinpoint to Daredevil. Now that Muse has been taken out, they don't have to do that, but it definitely felt like a very troubled part where Matt could easily be found out by having his fingerprints all over the evidence. So that was just one of my little pet peeves. I was kind of curious why they did that, but it does make Matt finally realize that Heather was the target. And I loved when Officer Powell came in and Matt just threw the baton at him, knocking him out. That was like just a fun, satisfying moment of him knocking out the dirty cop in just like a fun way. But then the cops also know the next target is Heather, and that's when we get to the moment of Fisk sending the Anti-Vigilante Task Force after Muse and also having Daredevil go after him now that Muse has tied up Heather in her office and is now starting to turn her into his next victim. And it's just a really interesting scene how Bastion is now changed into his Muse persona, talking about how Heather sees who he is and understands who he is, showing that trauma of just wanting to be seen, and even starting to cut her arm open, which then sets up the cops arriving, Heather calling him a coward for needing to wear a mask, which feels like a harsh blow to Daredevil because of the fact that he wears a mask, and I feel like that's also going to tie into if Heather does find out Matt is Daredevil, thinking that he's a coward because he wears a mask. So very curious to see how that's come back up later on, because it feels like they dropped that line in there specifically to kind of tie him back into Matt being Daredevil. And then we get the awesome moment of Daredevil coming through the window right before Muse has a chance to kill Heather and just having this absolute beat down. He is going full force knowing that the woman he loves is in danger, and he's not going to let another person he cares about dies. Just going full-blown rage, even doing Scorpion get over here as he throws his grapple straight through Muse's shoulder and rips him right back, smearing blood all over the ground, which was an insane scene. Like, this fight was just absolutely fantastic, just absolutely balls to the wall all over the place. Blood is going everywhere, and it's just a cool moment to show, like, anger and the rage that's in Daredevil and how he's not going to let another loved one get killed. So I just really liked how they portrayed that and showed his inner rage really coming out. Until, of course, Angela just starts blasting Muse, killing him in front of Daredevil. Like, I was not expecting that, for her to just start blasting the guy and then pass out because of the blood loss. But, like, that was just a shocking moment I wasn't expecting. I was fully expecting Muse to, like, get knocked out by Daredevil. The cops arrest him. There we go. I was not expecting Heather to just blast him several times. And then, of course, Daredevil gets away, the cops come in, and then Fisk tells Sergeant North that the task force is going to be the one that takes recognition for taking down Muse. They're going to leave Daredevil out of everything just to show and fool the city into Fisk and the task force being the ones to make the city a safer place, and that they're getting work done. Not revealing that Daredevil's back because everyone wants the Vigilante to be back to be that hero, but if they're pushing the spotlight away from him, that means people won't trust Vigilantes. They'll try to trust the police, they'll trust Fisk, and they'll believe they're actually doing good work in the city. Of course, that is all going to go to hell, because right away the BB report talks about how Daredevil was seen going in and out of that window, even though Daniel Blake now threatens BB to rewrite it so that the cops are the ones that did it, which I feel like is not going to be seen by the public. The public is not going to believe that. They're going to know that Daredevil was the one to do it because rumors are going to spread, right? One person's going to see it, the word's just going to spread like wildfire, and people are going to know that Daredevil is back and they're the ones that did it. Even if these reporters are reporting that the cops are the ones that did it, no one's going to believe it. Especially BB getting threatened by Daniel Blake definitely feels like she's going to get targeted later down the road with Daniel trying to do something that makes him more of a criminal, especially with him probably being turned into Fisk's little errand boy or a lackey. Like, it definitely feels like Daniel Blake is going down a dark path because he's such a suck up to Mayor Fisk. Then we catch up with Matt going to see Heather in the hospital, and she tells him that she killed Muse, and Matt being like, you didn't have a choice. Her being like, how do you know? Matt being like, because I know you. And she also mentions that Daredevil said her name. So it's definitely her probably piecing together that Matt is Daredevil, that Matt is the vigilante that saved her life, but was also wearing a mask and is a coward. Because as this conversation is going on, she definitely seems a little bit more confused, a little bit more like eye-opening, like something is going on in her brain to make her think that Matt is lying to her. And I'm very curious to see, how they're going to dive into this next episode, because I feel like that's going to be the next big conflict for Matt to be dealing with, is his relationship with Heather finding out he's Daredevil, and like dealing with the consequences of lying to her. And that's when we find out that the Anti-Vigilante task force has gone around and taken credit for taking down Muse, and they even hold up the mask of Muse as a trophy, which is kind of terrible to do because you're trying to show that you're following the law, but by holding up the mask as like a trophy, it's showing like, look at the hunt we did, look at this, like we killed this killer, like we took him down, kind of like the Punisher, and it doesn't feel like what cops really should be doing. However, it is really interesting to see what they're doing, like how they're setting up the Anti-Vigilante task force, how Mayor Fisk is now going after the vigilantes. Like, it's just all setting up the conflict for Daredevil needing more help and setting up possibly a bunch of street-level heroes teaming up together with Daredevil to take down Mayor Fisk and the Anti-Vigilante task force, because someone's going to need to do it because New York is filled with vigilantes and someone needs to stop the Kingpin from running the city. And I'm very curious to see how they're going to be dealing with that, because it's just like this really big plot point that's now coming, and that season 2 is already filming, and I bet you any money in the coming weeks, months, we're going to start seeing other actors slowly get caught on set that is going to set up this Defenders, street-level heroes team that are going to team up to go after Mayor Fisk. But I will say, with everything in this episode, I was shocked that they already killed Muse. Like, it felt like we got him, and then it was over. I felt like he was going to be a bigger part in the series. Like, there's going to be a couple more confrontations. He was going to get away a couple times. There were going to be this big final where Matt takes down Muse and finally takes him to jail the proper way after crossing the line with Bullseye in the first episode. However, instead, Heather killed him. He's now gone, unless he's going to magically come back with superpowers and he's going to regenerate. I don't see him coming back anytime soon, but we'll see. Feels like it was too soon to get rid of him. I definitely felt like he was going to be that very big bad for the final episode, but I guess the big bad is going to be Mayor Fisk and the Anti-Vigilante task force that's going after Daredevil and possibly other vigilantes this season. What did you think of this episode? How do you feel about Muse already being over and done with? And what do you think is going to be coming next for Daredevil, Heather, and the Anti-Vigilante task force? Let's discuss in the comments down below, and if you like this video, make sure to hit the like, the subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot, and you get to stay up to date with my Daredevil breakdowns, DC breakdowns, and my anime reactions. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll talk to you next week when it's time to break down another Daredevil Born Again episode.